everyone. We've got a panel of industry analysts here with us this morning. We're just going to share some insights on what they think, not what I think, what they think about what's going on in several parts of the industry. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. First, we have James Brehm, founder and CEO and Chief Technology Evangelist, I think, of James Brehm and Associates. Then Matt Hatton, who's CEO of Transforma Insights, and Alex Besen, who is CEO of the Besen Group. So I'll start with James. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I have a boutique market research and strategy consulting firm focused solely on IoT. We launched actually at this show, right, Carl? 10 years ago. I've been looking at this space for, God, 20 plus years. But I've got a background also in being an implementer and then also working on the vendor side with a hardware provider, also a network operator, as well as was one of the original guys at Rackspace in the cloud. And to me, what we're doing with IoT is really about the device, the network, and the cloud. And having that kind of a background gives me a little bit different perspective, I think, than others out there. So.
Yeah, Matt Hatton, and startlingly similar background in terms of both what the company does and my personal background. So I'm one of the founders of a company called Transforma Insights. We're a boutique research consulting firm focused on IoT, is I believe how you succinctly put it. So I can do no better than that. Very, very similar. My background's telco mostly. I've been an analyst for 25 years. My previous company we sold to Gartner. I showed a spectacular lack of imagination and did exactly the same thing over again and launched Transforma Insights in 2019. So yeah, that's me.
Okay. Yes, I've been in the telecommunication industry for over 30 years. I have a hands-on experience from mobile network operators and vendors in Europe and in North America. And been running the consultancy practice now for the past 20 years. And been focused on the private networks for the past 6 years. We offer strategic advisory, business development, market research, and training services for private wireless networks. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. So I guess the other part about this, I've got some questions for these gentlemen, but if anything they say sparks an interest and you want to ask a question, just the lights are a little bright, so stand up and wave your arms around, and we'll see if we can get the questions. So we're going to start out sort of at a broad level, and that is technology changes. You know, what is happening right now in the technology landscape, including private cellular, end-to-end, 5G, the metaverse, AI, you know, edge computing, and just the list goes on. But you know, where are we now, and what sort of technology impacts are affecting that landscape? So, Matt, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. In fact, anybody who was in my session yesterday, this will be quite a familiar set of topics I'll be talking through. But you know, there's a whole load of technology developments that have come through, particularly in the connectivity space that I tend to look at, and it's an incredibly fast-moving landscape. In fact, to the extent that it's become increasingly confusing, I would say, for anybody who's sitting here deploying. I mean, okay, you just, in terms of access technologies, do you use NB-IoT, do you use LTE-M, do you use RedCap, you wait for that, that's the technology that's coming through. Do you look at non-terrestrial networks, do you look at 5G, do you look, there's just it's new technology coming through every year. But I think the interesting ones for me are, in terms of what's like just come up on the horizon. One is around the non-terrestrial networks, the effectively delivering 5G, well, narrowband IoT over satellite as a kind of a fallback for cellular connectivity, effectively a hybrid cellular satellite offering, and that looks pretty interesting. The network operators are always looking for some kind of a value add, some additional functionality to add into a proposition, and with this kind of fallback, redundant communications, they can do that. So that's interesting for me. But the big one's probably 5G, and I'm kind of hesitant to say that because we've kind of been promised 5G for quite a long time, and we're only really now starting to get standalone networks being properly activated. But I look at some of the functionality that might be enabled by it, and you think the network exposure function and the ability to have a programmable network that can do a whole lot of new things around adding reliability, adding additional security, having your own effectively, in inverted commas, private network. That all looks very, very interesting, and that's a sea change from what we've seen with other technologies. You know, just adding extra bandwidth. Well, it's a bit of an increment. You can maybe do a higher resolution of video with that. Well, fine, that's all right, but it doesn't change the landscape very much. The massive machine-type communications capabilities with like NB-IoT and LTM and so on, well, that just reduces the cost a bit, it increases the battery life, it allows you to do a few things, but it's sort of within parameters that we already understand. But this ultra-reliable low latency, well, nobody's really developed applications for that, so it kind of takes a while to evolve, but it does look, I think, quite interesting, and I think it's sort of starting to get to the point where it might actually be a thing. But I'm sort of hesitant about that. And that's a couple, and I'll stop waffling on now and let somebody else have a go.
James, why don't you jump in on that, please?
First of all, I absolutely, even though I cover the space, I hate the term IoT with respect to it being a thing, right?
Right.
Because it really isn't. Matt brought up a whole lot of different, what I'll call buzzwords of what right? But you pull all those together and you get IoT, right? You can't, and everybody's doing IoT. I mean, you can't spell idiot without IoT. But with respect to what's happening, how it's moving, I couldn't agree more that it's fast moving. But let's break it down into where we're at with a lot of this stuff. Is it consumer focused or is it business focused, right? And I think a lot of businesses are still trying to figure out what the enterprise value proposition is and how do I do it simple. Small and medium business have been kind of excluded from participating in the benefits of connected solutions because no one's figured out an easy button for them. You know, if I'm running 3 restaurants in Hollywood, Florida, and I have a rodent problem, I want a connected rat trap, right? That's an IoT device. But where do I get it? How do I get it? I don't want to have to build my own. And up until, you know, over the last 10 years, a lot of this has been science experiment world, and we've talked about what platform do I use? Thank God I didn't hear you say that, right? What, you know, and what are we doing?
I mean, I agree to a great extent that IoT all-encompassing catch-all thing isn't a particularly useful thing because if you're an end user, you don't think about doing an IoT, right? You think about connecting a rat trap. And there's kind of I was thinking about this morning. There's a kind of it depends problem, right? As analysts, we always have the problem that people ask a good question and we go, it depends.
Yeah, it depends.
Right? And in IoT, that is writ large because someone will say to you, what technology should I use for my IoT solution? What access network? What platform? What this, that, and the other should I be using for my platform? Protocol? Whatever. And the answer is always, it depends. What's the solution? What are you trying to do? Well, it depends. Now, you get that in every branch of IT, right? If you're picking an ERP system, right, the answer will be, it depends. But in IoT, it's writ large. And I think that is illustrative of the fact that it's sort of not a thing. Yeah. But for us, it's a thing. I mean, I'm happy sitting here talking about IoT because it kind of encompasses all of the things that I look at, right? But that's about it.
All right, so Alex, why don't you give us your viewpoint on the landscape?
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the mobile network operators, they're looking to monetize their 5G networks, John. They're focused on the enterprises side of the business, right? That's what they're looking at the private wireless networks in order to at least offer the total turnkey solution, for enterprises leveraging, their 5G hybrid networks, so that in order to at least get some kind of a return of the investment from the that they have done for the spectrum as well as the building out the network, right? So we see that past few years, and then this year, I think we will see more activity on the 5G standalone, announcements from the additional operators in the market. I think the first one in the US was T-Mobile last year. Recently, we got Roger from Canada. They also deployed their 5G standalone network. So with that, I think we will see also some network slicing offers coming as well to enterprises. So they have to make that decision on are we going to deploy our own private network, or are we going to partner with the mobile network operator for network slicing type of service for limited time basis, right? So we will see which one is going to prevail, which one is going to increase in the market, hopefully by end of this year.
Okay, excellent.
John.
Oh, go ahead.
Alex said something. He said that the mobile network operators are trying to monetize their investment in 5G, and a lot of people don't even think about how much money these guys are plowing into doing this kind of stuff. In the U.S., over the last 20 years, AT&T and Verizon have been the top CapEx companies for 19 of the 20 years, right? Think about that, how much money they're throwing in there. Right. They get a lot of hassle from Wall Street on paying, and they're still throwing off a decent dividend to their shareholders, but they get hassled by Wall Street a ton on how come they're not performing better or growing at some rocket pace. Well, it's because they've got these investments that they're putting in there. And one of the tier one operators actually said to Wall Street at a financial conference, he said, we aren't going to recoup a dime of investment and to the bottom line until 2028, said that last year. So they are looking for solutions and things like that. We need to help them streamline how fast they monetize this thing.
So Alex, I want to continue on private 5G a little bit, and the variety of frequency bands, licensing models. What is that going to do to our business and enterprise connectivity landscape?
Yeah, I think that in the US, given what FCC has done in terms of the CBRS PAL spectrum, it gave an opportunity to enterprises to launch their own dedicated private networks, right? So that's great for the enterprises, but maybe not sufficient enough, right? So that's what they're looking at the mobile network operators for hybrid models, right? Because they need the micro network in order for roaming purposes. We will talk about the multi-IMSIs, things like that, right? So they need still maybe second partnership with a mobile network operator. Depending on the deployment scenarios, if it's a closed network or is it an open network, right? So, and then, there are a couple of, I would say, models out there, options for spectrum. They have to also understand each spectrum's parameters, which one is acceptable for the private network use cases, right? So we see in the market, leveraging high band spectrum with the mid band spectrum, depending on the use case of each private network. So that's also critical. I think not just go with one spectrum because it's available. Maybe they need to be able to mix and match the spectrum for the enterprises use cases.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Can I jump in on it? How do I put this? We've done quite a lot of work with a big European telco that's done a lot of really sophisticated private 5G, and here we've got a terminology issue. I'm thinking there about dedicated network rather than private over a public RAN, so slightly different. As in, you've got to deploy the one yourself, you've got to manage it yourself. But their experience in deploying this in mining, in ports, in a whole host of different, really fantastically interesting use cases. And they say, we cannot wait until we don't have to actually deploy a private set of infrastructure just for that customer, and we can support that deployment using the RAN, because the public RAN, the public network, because the cost, the margins are just negligible. The competition from some of the new arrivals in that space is painful to see, and they would much rather, it's much more efficient and much more joined up for them to support it using just the radio access network with possibly some additional capacity deployed for the client. So there's kind of a problem with private wireless in the context of just dedicated standalone private networks, that the economics are rather more challenging, and you need somebody to manage it. And who's going to manage a mobile network? Well, mobile network operators, they're pretty good at managing mobile networks, despite the fact that maybe they're not making as much money as we might think. When it comes to running mobile networks, they're pretty good. Could the same be said for HPE or Microsoft or whoever else might be wanting to get into the private network space? You still need somebody to manage it. So there's kind of a disconnect there, in my opinion. So
I would wholeheartedly agree, and the enterprise doesn't want to, or doesn't have the background or wherewithal to manage these themselves, right? And they quite frankly don't want to. They want an easy button, right? They want someone to take their pain away.
Well, I think, Matt, you brought in the global aspect here. I've heard several of you say in the US we do this, in North America we do this. And one of, beyond just the business models and operating models in Europe and other parts of the world that are different in how we deliver services, I think there's some regulatory issues as well.
There's a bunch of things. I mean, regulatory is sort of my number one trend for 2024 in terms of what's gonna impact IoT. I mean, we tend to think about when we talk about what's going to be big in the year, actually it's not what's going to be big in the year. These are things that are kind of been simmering over a few years and tailing off over the next few years. But regs is something that's actually quite significant just for 2024. We've seen a bunch of stuff around cybersecurity. We've always had permanent roaming restrictions and various other things. But there's a very pronounced polarization in terms of the regulatory environments of Europe versus China versus the US. I mean, you take what the FCC's been saying about, should we say, vendor selection, and you think, okay, well, that's going to have some implications for markets. You look at the Cloud Act and the obligation that puts on the hyperscalers, but you look at also what's happening in the EU with things like the European Data Act, which effectively prohibit some of the hyperscalers from access to some parts of the IoT market. So there's kind of a polarization happening in there. So that's one thing. Hang on, shall I let you jump in on that one if you want to?
I was just going to say, it's not just Europe that is looking at the data sovereignty piece, right?
No,
it's all over the world, right? And that's a tremendous thing. And on top of that, a lot of emerging countries and countries that are going to drive some of this innovation. Indonesia, for example, the government jointly owns the major telcos, and they're funding some of this R&D effort, and they have explicit challenges. The regulators are basically in bed with the actual carrier. They're almost an offshoot of it, and they're asking questions like, well, what the heck do we do new with 5G that's going to make us any money, and should we do this today or wait and hit pause? So.
Yeah, completely. That regulatory one is, if you're not aware of what the regulations are, you really ought to be. Is a simple message.
Yeah.
And the other big one I think that I'm seeing changing is that's different. That was your question. What's different? It's the distribution model, right? So we're here at a channel partners event, and there's MSPs and all these various players that more or less don't exist in Europe, right?
Right.
If you're selling connectivity or devices or whatever, the channels work in a rather different way. It's much more based on direct selling, not through these distributors. So if people, European vendors coming to the US are suddenly faced with this environment that they don't really understand particularly well and kind of need a bit of help at walking the way through. So that's an interesting one. I'm not sure I've got much of an analysis to offer on what the implications of that are, but it's certainly a difference.
Well, and I think, when you talk about regulatory environment, you're also talking about licensing and spectrum and satellite versus terrestrial, those kind of things.
Well, John,
Yeah.
that's the connectivity regulatory environment. We haven't even gotten into things like what the FDA is saying about connected healthcare and medical devices,
Right.
or other vertical markets. So we have to then, that's what makes it so complex for this is we have to look at the connectivity regulatory market, what's going on there, but then you have to scratch below the surface at some of these vertical application areas as well. So
Yeah, but fortunately, the companies deploying tend to have a much better understanding of what the regs related to their vertical look like. Right?
Absolutely,
So
but the connectivity guys or the hardware guys that are they're building a router or gateway, they have no clue,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
As to what they're right.
Yeah, fair point.
So, I mean, very complex, clearly.
Yep.
And Alex, just in terms of all these different layers of connectivity, we'll stick with that for a moment here. How does the private 5G, the satellite, the Wi-Fi, how do you mesh all these things together in a business environment?
I mean, you see that some of the enterprises leveraging all that technologies for the private networks, right? They leverage Wi-Fi, they leverage satellite, they leverage cellular connectivity, depending on the use cases. They complement each other. They just don't choose just one, for their own private wireless network. They can mix and match again, depending on the use cases, right? A good example can be oil field, right? We worked on that use case in Gulf of Mexico. They have the wireless network for the oil field, but also they have the satellite connectivity, right? So that's one example. If you look at the hotels, convention centers like here, they leverage Wi-Fi. They might also leverage the cellular network for different use cases, right? So they complement for each other's, in the different deployment scenarios, right?
Excellent. You guys, any comments on that? All right. So, I think one thing that we talked about here was this idea of cybersecurity and global cybersecurity. How do we manage that across all these different kind of networks? And IoT has been blamed, as an entry point for incursions into networks. So what, as an industry or as an enterprise, would they need to think about in terms of keeping networks secure?
Do you want to have a go?
You can raise your hand.
And then,
sorry, that one wasn't on the list.
no, it's a very big one, right? And not least because the threat vector has exploded in recent years, because you're seeing more critical systems, more devices that are incredibly diverse, that the enterprise IT department is not used to managing that diversity of devices, right? They can handle security and device management on laptops and mobile phones, but you're expecting them to do it across a whole range of millions of other types of devices. It becomes incredibly complex. I mean, the simple answer is find a partner, I suppose, but that it's kind of easier said than is it easier said than done? Maybe it's not. You've got to find somebody who you think can deliver the security across all elements of the IoT stack, and you've got to kind of bake the considerations of security into the thing as you're building it secure by design. I mean, this isn't anything radically new, but I guess that's kind of my perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember 10 years ago at this conference, the CTO of a company, Numerex, that doesn't exist anymore, talked about security, and he talked about an issue that they had experienced with one of their customers, and having a breach, and quite frankly, it was a mistake, right? Then, today, the security landscape has changed. We have a lot of state-sponsored, right, security issues and pushing, and that's only accelerating. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about doing with IoT and the benefits from them require resilience, right? We need to take a look at what exploits are happening, what the common vulnerabilities are, and marry that up at both from a hardware level and a software level. I think for the most part, the carrier-grade networks do a very good job of that. It's when we get to the endpoint where we have that exposure. And I think you'll see later today an announcement from a major company out there about actually addressing that and creating tools to actually help take a look at some of those vulnerabilities and that exposure that's out there. But I think that we often forget that we got, just in the cellular world, in the US, about 220 million connected things out there, cellularly enabled connected devices. And the critical infrastructure that's supported behind all that stuff. And it's a scary time because we haven't looked at the secure aspect or the secure nature of the software in there. But, who's responsible for updating the software on a router that's protecting or that is communicating at a power substation or water treatment facility? Is it the router vendor? Is it the module and component level guys that are updating that? Whose responsibility is it to ensure that this stuff is solid? I think there's still a lot of questions out there, and we have not looked as an industry at security from a holistic perspective in IoT.
Well, I disagree a bit in as much as some of the regulations coming through and some of the guidance from various government agencies in all sorts of countries about, okay, no hard-coded passwords, no, you've got to have a mechanism for doing over-the-air updates, you've got to, like just some basic stuff, which probably eliminates 99% of problems. I bet the Numerex one was just somebody doing something dumb, right?
Oh, that's so. Most security flaws, yeah. most breaches are somebody doing something dumb. 20 years ago, it was a Frost and Sullivan, and we had to talk about this at a conference, and just to prove the stupidity of what people do that's dumb, I went ahead and used our receptionist as an prime example of it. I actually, on the way to the conference, I stopped at her desk and I took a snapshot of her monitor where her passwords were on a sticky note on a monitor, right? So, yes, most of those breaches are that way. But those regulations, most people are looking at those new regulations that are coming out for the stuff that's coming in the future. Yeah. What about the crap that's out there on the network today that's really, really flawed?
So, I think you mentioned a number of connected items, connected devices on cellular, and then you magnify that, how many connected devices are out there on Wi-Fi, on LoRa, on other...
10x it, yeah.
Yep.
So, it kind of brings me back to where you started, James, about IoT. Is IoT even a relevant term? Because we're going from the very lowest level of scanning data points, up through very complex devices and applications. So is IoT relevant?
Relevant for me. I know what to put on my business card, right? I mean,
it depends.
It depends,
right? It depends.
Yeah, depends. Yeah, it does. Yeah. It's relevant for this audience. It's relevant for me. It's relevant on the supply side. So in terms of anybody who's on the supply side who's connecting remote devices that aren't cell phones or probably tablets, certainly not laptops, but everything else. It's kind of the catch-all for everything else that's connected, and that's kind of fine.
And it's just the term. Right, 20 years ago it was telemetry and telematics, and it moved to machine-to-machine or machine-type communication, right? Then it became the IoT. Then Cisco tried to make it be the IoE, and people call it the industrial IoT, and they throw another I in it, or the medical IoT, and they put an M in front of it. Yes, it's relevant because I think it was an IBM television commercial. Circa 2007, where they said soon there will be 1 billion connected devices out there, right? Well, guess what? Soon there will be 1 trillion connected devices out there. Yeah, I use a T word.
Define soon. And define device as well, right? I mean, if you count every single sensor in a car, well, then it starts mounting up, right?
But it depends.
It does. Yeah.
All right, great. So, I think what we've heard about is the commercial landscape is clearly evolving, right, as more applications come to bear. So, for new IoT services and applications, I guess what's the best entry point for a business who's, looking to innovate? Where should they be searching the marketplace, if you will, to make an impact?
It's interesting you use the word marketplace, because there isn't really a place to go look for a solution. You kind of have to go hunting around a whole bunch of players, unless you can find it in something that's a IoT marketplace. The challenge is that they typically haven't been very good. Right? They are, it's a limited range of products. You typically can't click to buy. You can't, it's not a particularly user-friendly experience. It's as if, and I used this example in my session yesterday, but if you went on Expedia and you said, this is where I want to fly to, and these are the dates I want to go, and every single thing that came back said, call us for pricing, that would be the equivalent. So, I've gone off on a little tangent about marketplaces because it happens to be a bit that I'm looking at the moment. But there are examples where it's good. Distributors selling hardware, great. That's where people go buy their hardware. But it's much more focused, I think. And what's much more interesting is the places that you would go to for other enterprise applications, ERP and CRM and a whole bunch of other things, are a much better place for discovery of IoT because people don't go out thinking, I need to buy IoT. They're thinking, I need something to streamline my supply chain or to, I don't know, improve my building automation or whatever it is.
So we're getting out of the selling hardware, selling technology and into, solution.
More solutions focused, yes, and also IoT in the context of a whole bunch of other things. So maybe it's SAP's marketplace or Salesforce's marketplace. It's a more sensible place for it to go through. But that's kind of indicative of a whole trend, which is this is a solutions landscape and one where the customer doesn't really understand what the IoT pieces of the proposition are, with some notable exceptions. The car makers do and utilities generally do, but most companies don't really understand what's involved in building an IoT solution, and they need their hands held as they walk through the process of building this thing, or even give it to somebody else to build. So it's a services marketplace, and that's even further illustrated by the fact that there are a whole bunch of companies that came into the IoT space thinking we're gonna put out a all-encompassing, all-singing, all-dancing, infinitely scalable IoT platform, and everybody's going to fall over themselves to jump onto it. Whether that's what's an IoT or the various things that Microsoft's put out, and And we've seen a kind of almost a retrenching away from that in recognition that this is a services market rather than one which is just about lobbing some technology at somebody and kind of hoping that they'll make use of it. So, sorry, I've rambled around about a few topics there. But
somewhere along the way, somebody's got to provide that foundational infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, just the white glove service, the contextualization, the understanding of the customer needs and the kind of rendering of a set of technologies for them and making it, I can take your pain away kind of an approach.
So Alex, from the, sorry, go ahead.
Yesterday, I saw a demo here from somebody, and if they have any questions about this later, they can reach out to me and I can make an introduction. But a guy with a lot of experience in this space that's worked both in the carrier and MVNO world and solutioning world has put together a new generative AI platform that actually helps people with answer that question.
Yeah.
Where do I go for that?
Yep.
Right? And we're starting to get to that scratching point of this is where you get the tools where you can go out there and search, utilizing natural language to find some of these different solutions. Now, the challenge I have with that is then the click to buy process isn't there yet. Right?
No.
Right? You would think that Amazon would have this damn thing figured out, right? They're the biggest guy out there that's selling stuff that makes it easy for us to all consume today. But if you take a look at the Amazon IoT marketplace, right, and what they've done there, with the Amazon IoT platform, with the normal Amazon solution, and then you got the AWS connectivity pieces, none of those guys over at Amazon even talk to each other, and nothing's interlinked or intertwined. So I think we're still several years out from people to take a look at that. Like Matt said, he's looking at the marketplace issue. We're looking at the marketplace issue because I also believe that the failure there is by the industry is it really is hurting the mom and pop shops, right? The smaller people, because you talk about a large multinational, Fortune 1000 company. They have 3 Freds in a shed in the back room innovating and ideating and putting some money towards this and trying to build stuff and creating science experiments that end up turning into massively scaled IoT deployments. Bob with the Indonesian restaurant last night that I ate at, they don't have that time or effort, but they got the same needs.
So from a foundation standpoint, go ahead.
We've actually got a question, a real live question.
Hang on. Carl's coming with the mic. He doesn't run as fast
Carl's
as you.
sprinting across to you now, yeah.
So I actually have registered and myself tried to work on the AWS cloud and be kind of curious about your guys' view of Sidewalk as well. But I think all the components are actually there. The issue is, and you've already kind of articulated it, it's more that the dollars required to actually do it right and to integrate it together to make the product. It's actually just so ridiculously flexible that to true it up to what your actually application is. And I've gotten quotes for some of this stuff. I mean, I think that's the fundamental issue with a lot of this IoT stuff is the components all exist, but the integration. And when I reached out to the companies, I mean, I think you're probably in a 300 to a 500,000 mark to basically get this stuff going if you're a corporation. Which does kind of lead back to the question of, do you actually need to do this, or can you just piece it together with, in essence, the LoRa-based systems, which obviously you can actually put together, and there are marketplaces out there for them, and very nice back ends that are much simpler to integrate and put together.
So are we at storytelling? We have all the pieces. Who's creating the story to the audience, I guess, or to the business? Is that where we are in this industry?
Sorry, I don't follow.
In terms of integration, who is going to take that on? Who's going to be the integrator? Is it going to have to be the business, or is there a new tier business opportunity to bring all those pieces together?
Well, if you listen to the big SIs, they're already there, right? But they're only there if there's enough zeros behind what they're doing. Yes, for a lot of these successful things, there are so many small solutions integrators out there that are doing this stuff, and there's still a lot of money for people to be made in what I'll call lifestyle businesses that haven't scaled, where they're doing some of this design development for folks. So
and don't scale, and that's just fine.
Yeah.
There's this assumption that IoT has to be, as I said earlier, infinitely scalable. It really doesn't. But yeah.
Can I try to build on what was trying to be said? Yesterday we had a conversation in one of our breakout rooms, and I saw a parallel, and I want to know if you guys see the same parallel. Okay, when we created Vonage, what was going on was Jeff Pulver had built a minutes exchange where we had all these contracts for terminating minutes, and we realized that we had no one with a buy-side mentality of wanting to take those minutes and make a service out of it. So we couldn't make the minutes exchange work, which is why we created Vonage. So the question is there a roll-up to be done, or is there a service provider to be created on the integration side to make it so that there's the equivalent of Vonages on systems integration for IoT, or is it just going to stay so compartmentalized that lifestyle businesses are the future?
Well, Carl, there's a lot of Vonages out there in the IoT space, right? A lot of times we call them MVNOs, and we're seeing the guys that were just cheap and cheerful connectivity sellers of 10 and 20 years ago pivoting to offering more managed professional services types where they're offering the full solution. So, but VoIP is just another way to spell IoT. I see a lot of the same faces in the rooms that we're talking about that. It is about IP. So.
The issue that he's describing is actually that the transaction cost of pulling the stuff together is so high, and I think what he's alluding to is somebody needs to actually make this more frictionless and drive down the cost, and then you basically end up with much better adoption. It's just very
you point out it's very expensive. Well, what's your return? Maybe if you don't have the return on investment to do this stuff, you shouldn't be doing it. In this space, I talked to a connectivity company yesterday who said they're working with some water meter manufacturers on connecting the water meters, and they're getting 15 cents per meter per month for the connectivity. Mm-hmm. And they're absolutely happy and ecstatic with that. Well, I know a municipality out there, right, that has got 3,000 water meters in its small municipality, and they're paying their solution partner $15 per meter per month on a 15-year contract, right? There's tremendous margin there. And that city is ecstatic. They're fine with what they're paying. We focus so much on it's too expensive, right? And I hear that all the time in these rooms. Well, you got two problems that are causing it. If, and I'm not going to say it is too expensive, if it's too expensive, one of the problems is margin stacking. And it's because companies aren't working together as partners. Everybody wants to own the end customer, and everybody wants to have a 20% or 30% EBITDA, right? So margin stack, margin stack, margin stack. We got to get away from some of that and look at total value and revenue sharing in some of these business models. But the other piece is, and Carl asked the question: is it time maybe you alluded to it? Is it time for a roll up? Yeah, we've been talking about that for forever, and there's too many participants and new ones happening every day.
Yeah, and I think coming back to your point about pricing. Too expensive? What's too expensive? I mean, one of the defining trends that we've seen is just continued substantial price erosion in quite a lot of the elements of IoT. The hardware space is pretty much commoditized. The connectivity space is, as you say, sub $1 a month is par for the course.
Yeah.
You've got, once put in offers in the market of €10, $10 for 10 years connectivity. I've seen even more aggressive pricing than that. Now, do people actually end up going with that as an option? It's kind of moot point. But the fact that you're sort of selling that as a baseline of what something we think we talk about as $1 IoT, as in there'll be a big chunk of cellular-based IoT which won't generate more than $1 of connectivity revenue per year. Right, $1 IoT, and you've got to cope with those economics. And by and large, they are kind of coping with those economics. And I was sitting in a room with a big mobile network operator in Europe who talking about their connected car win, and they're charging sub 20 cents per month for a connected car offering. Crazy sort of levels. But the point is that that's probably about as low as it can go. He says, but who knows? But and James is absolutely right. If you can't get a return on investment at those sorts of highly competed down prices, then maybe the application doesn't make any sense.
So, I guess what I'm hearing is, and I think, James, you mentioned it before, this buy-side mentality or selling the solutions. As technologists, we know what it costs, we know what it takes, but then, who's looking at the market side? What's the market availability? What are we giving away before we get into these, highly monetized and competitive erosion of costs? So, is that something that's missing when we talk about IoT? Is the market side of it in terms of sales and what the market will bear, frankly?
I think what's missing from IoT is, and that is, we have people that are making solutions to sell solutions, and you have the other side of the house that wants to consume it, right? Education is probably one of the bigger things that's lacking in IoT, and helping people understand what their return is, right?
Well, just
a large insurer of jewelry is looking for solutions to protect their jewelry in transit, right? And put it in right? And those guys are looking for a very cheap solution to provide the asset tracking on that. Do they need, or are they best served with a sub 10 cent or sub 20 cent per month service plan and a sub $50 device and sensor when they're protecting tens of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars of this stuff? Hell no. What's the ROI if they lose something? Calculate your ROIs correctly, folks, and educate yourself on what value you're getting out of this.
Well, and I think,
can I put a slightly more positive spin on things? It seems like we've been a little bit kind of, this space is awful, and IoT, everything's too expensive or too cheap, or everything, nobody can sell this stuff, or nobody can buy it or implement it or whatever, right? The last decade, we've seen a 10x growth in the number of connected IoT devices, right? Yeah. 10 times. That, obviously, that doesn't equate to 10 times the value of spend, but that's still a pretty damn impressive thing that's been done, and with all the associated benefits that have accrued to the companies that are deploying this stuff. So it's gone pretty well. Now there's probably some tinkering around a few things to make it a little easier to find and deploy. And certainly education is an important thing, but probably more education in the context of not thinking about IoT as a separate thing, but IoT as part of a roster of enterprise services, and therefore going to market in that way. But let's not beat yourself up too much. There's something like, what was it, 89% of cars roll off the production line with some kind of connectivity built into them, and that's 70% being cellular. So, you know, the car industry has embraced it wholeheartedly. You know, there's billions of smart meters going in. There's, you know, all of these things are pretty impressive. What might be lacking is a little bit of getting more into the sort of SMB space and helping out mom and pop stores, or, you know, whatever. But you know, you guys have done a pretty good job. Well done. Round of applause to yourself.
All right, Carl has a question for us.
Yeah, I actually, it's kind of building on what's been said by James. Only instead of talking about margin stacking, I'm just thinking about it from the standpoint of because it's compartmentalized, every single component gets looked at, and everything's too expensive because they keep going for the cheapest price. And James and I know of situations where, you know, FirstNet solutions are getting deployed that are supposedly secure and are using the cheapest, best effort solutions. So I wanted to go over to Alex, because Alex has got models that are very much tops-down oriented. And I was wondering, does his customers, when he shows them these models, want to basically have them break it apart further and make it so that they start nickel and diming you on everything, rather than actually taking your guidance as to here's the total cost of the service, you know, think of it from the total cost perspective, don't think of it from the compartmentalized perspective. So, Alex, I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Carl. That's the one reason we have developed the most comprehensive TCO tools for the private wireless networks. You know, so looking at the use cases, and then we look at the bandwidth allocation for each use case. We can then calculate the number of small cells, the number of devices, IoT devices, and number of bandwidth dedicated for this private wireless network. So the line items, you know, it can be comprehensive in terms of the CapEx, looking at from the small cells, looking at the core network devices, all the way to the, you know, OpEx models. You know, like they can be offered by the system integrators, mobile network operators, you know, or the hyperscalers. You know, you're looking at the cloud, you're looking at the pay-as-you-go managed service, hybrid models. So our tools, they're able to calculate the estimated cost for this private wireless network, and then, in addition, demonstrate the opportunity cost to enterprises, which is basically the ROI, right? If we cannot demonstrate the ROI to enterprises, we don't believe that they will be able to, you know, move forward with the investment that they require, you know, invest in this network, right? Yeah. So yeah. I think that's the key challenge in our experience, to demonstrate that opportunity cost, you know, right, by walking through the whole CapEx and OpEx, and then you know, and convincing the CIO as well as the CFO, you know, for that decision-making process. Yeah.
So, you know, to Carl's point, you want to buy the wedding cake, not flour and sugar and lard and all the pieces. You want that total solution. And, you know, to go back to James'
You're putting lard in your wedding cake?
Yes. Well,
that's interesting.
You'd be surprised if they put it in wedding cake.
Okay, good.
So to go back to James' water meter solution, you know, they're happy because of that ROI, that TCO. They're not driving a truck around the city. They're not paying an extra employee. They're saving money. You know, so it's telling that top-down story. We've just got a few minutes left, so I want to go to, we'll start with Alex. What surprised you in the past year in this marketplace, or in this technology space, and what do you expect is going to happen this year?
Yeah, so last year, what we saw surprise in the market, John, was we saw a couple of vendors deploying, announcing multi-core networks for the neutral host solutions, you know, for private wireless networks, right? So I think that was a big surprise for everybody in the industry. I think this year we might see, so if you look at it, they have announced 1 or 2 operators partnership with that. One was AT&T and the other one was T-Mobile. I think this year we expect maybe additional tier 1 operators joining the solution offering. It makes sense. I think it would be great to have all the top tier 1 operators, getting together and then offering the solution. So that way it will be beneficial for the enterprises. This is a great solution for the indoor coverage, right? Requirements. So no one is left behind, right?
Excellent.
So that's what we expect.
Thank you. Matt, surprises and expectations.
Yeah, genuine in terms of things that have surprised me, I got a couple. Because, we spend a lot of our time talking with all sorts of vendors and adopters and so on in IoT. And during the last year, what has surprised me is one was around connectivity management platforms, as in we thought this was a market that was kind of sewn up. It was Cisco, it was Ericsson, but then the Ericsson platform got sold, and I use the term advisedly, to Aeris. But Cisco's managed to sort of turn that into something that's at least washing its face. So they've done quite well. But the fact that lots and lots of companies are out there looking for alternatives, because we kind of felt there were some own ones. Verizon's obviously got its own, and Vodafone and so on. But the fact that there was a lot more scouting around looking for other alternatives, or maybe sourcing multiple platforms or whatever, and that's kind of reflective of market erosion, certainly at the low end of the market. So that was a little bit of a surprise. The other one's about channels to market. So just the sheer volume of conversations that I have with people about how do I do something other than direct sales going through indirect. I'm not thinking really MVNOs, but I'm thinking VARs and MSPs and various others, and just trying to get their hands around how can I reorient or improve my go-to-market in that respect. So that's a couple. One for 2024, very quickly, it's the regulations thing. I already mentioned it. That's the thing that's going to hit hardest in 24.
James, you got about 2 minutes to wrap us up.
I think the thing that surprised me the most was the amount of security challenges and the volume of discussions that started to happen, especially, inquiry letters from Congress to the FCC, asking the right questions finally on some of this stuff. What I see moving forward, Matt talked about the connectivity management platforms. 10 years ago, we did a study, and we went out and we stated that what's missing is that single pane of management glass that's holistic across multiple carriers and multiple technologies. We still don't have that en masse, right?
Symmetric and IoTM would disagree, but yes.
But en masse, right? Mm-hmm. They've got a handful of millions, right? Mm-hmm. Right. That's what I see for this year. One of those things. Yes, the regulatory, absolutely. But that single pane of glass expansion and people actually seeing what the value of that is, and ending the swivel chair problem between different logins, different carriers, different passwords, things like that. But let's extend that to, if I'm an enterprise and I have some stuff that's on satellite, I have some stuff that's cellular, and I have some stuff that's LoRa or low power, right? That's non-cellular. Mm. Do I want to see those assets under one pane of glass? Absolutely. And I think we're going to see a movement to more ready adoption from the enterprise on that stuff.
Well, all right. Maybe you don't want to see it at all, and you just want somebody else to take care
of
it. But that's the market splits. There's some people want to do one, some want to do the other.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. I think we're done, Carl.
Give a round of applause.